Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan and MS Pierce, and my guest who I'm super excited to speak to. He's just got a book out that I'm unfortunately yet to read because it's been so quick between getting in contact with Shaun and doing this interview. So I haven't yet read his book and I'm really excited to read that. Although it sounds weird to say I'm excited to read a book that is surely going to be haunting and, talk about things like torture. I won't give you the intro into who Shaun Pinner is. Many in the UK might know he's been on the media scene a little bit in the UK and on the news very much because of what happened with him and being captured and released and torture, all the things we're going to talk about. But I'll let him educate us with who he is and what his experiences have been. It's going to be a bit of a free-flowing conversation. We are going to go to some fairly challenging places at times. This is a story at the end of the day of fighting, of capture, of torture, but hopefully of release and indeed hope. So thank you, Shaun, for agreeing to come on. I really appreciate it, especially as you're going to be saying things that you've said a million times before.
I don't mind that. It's no problem.
So you are at the moment in Poland. Do you want to just give us what you're doing right now before we then sort of rewind back to actually 2018 and before the war started?
Well, I'm a former British serviceman, served 9 years in the Royal Anglian Regiment. I went on tours in Bosnia and Northern Ireland and did my bit. I was also trained in SERE, which is Survival, Escape, Resist and Evade training, on my second tour to Bosnia in the early 90s. So I'd had some sort of experience in survival training and resistance training. I'm also now, since my exchange, working across NATO countries and within militaries, talking about my experience at the hands of the Russians. And obviously talking about the cultural aspects of Ukraine and language and geography and being sort of an intermediary between the NATO countries and Ukraine. So this is what my job is now.
So you were in Ukraine before the war. You weren't one of these sort of international legion people that came along to join up and then you got involved that way. You were embedded within Ukrainian society before that. What's your story with being in Ukraine years before the war started, or years before this version of the war started?
Well, as you know, I get a lot of trolls calling me a mercenary. Well, it's anything far from the truth, to be honest. I'm married to Ukrainian initially, so my family's Ukrainian, or one half of it. I'd lived in Ukraine since 2018. I've been an instructor with National Guard. I did a 3-year contract with the Marines. I was also joined the Marines because it was the only way you could get citizenship and residency. So I wanted to give something back to the country before I took citizenship within the country. So I joined the Marines. I was the first foreigner to pass all aspects of parachute training with Ukrainian Marines, to jump as a Ukrainian soldier. I was also a section commander with the Marines. I was the first probably foreigner, as I know, to command the BTR, which is a Russian APC. Section commander on the front line, first guy to run a position on the front line. It was that much of a novelty. The politicians from RADA used to come to the positions to see the position with Brits and Ukrainians working together on the front lines. I passed the Marines beret test as well, because and I wasn't just like the first foreigner, probably well, a group of foreigners to do it before I get a lot of hate mail from my mates. But yeah, the first one of the first foreigners to do that, and probably the oldest guy, one of the oldest guys to do that at sort of 46 as well. So I always loved the military. I was at an impasse in my life where I wasn't sure where I was going. I'd split up from a 9-year relationship. I sold my business. I was really didn't want to carry on normal life of just commuting to work, traveling around the M25 and, 16-hour days. And but I was at a point in my life when my son went off to uni and he sort of discovered beer and life. And, I was on my own quite a bit. So I just thought I want to do some things that make me happy. So I went sort of to Syria first, which was my first experience periods of working with volunteer groups with the Kurds. I came back after 8 months there and really was like, I really enjoyed that. And then decided to go to a friend of mine had a job offer for me in Mariupol. To cut a long story short, I know we don't have time, but just sort of said, we're looking for instructors. So I went over to Kiev, had a couple of weeks in Kiev and thought, I like this here. It was in February, so it was really cold. But by March, as you know, the transition between cold and hot is very quick in Ukraine. So already now, we're in April. We've had summer since the 30th of March.
Wow.
And a couple of weeks earlier, it was in the minuses. So, it's that transition goes. So I fell in love with the country. The spring and summer in Ukraine is amazing. The people are more community orientated and family orientated here. So I fell in love with that. We didn't have a lot of the same bureaucracy as you do in England. I mean, there isn't speed cameras at every corner. It doesn't cost you £25 to park on the beach for the day. It's still free we still have butchers, greengrocers, and, as well as the supermarkets. And I just fell in love with the country, fell in love with my wife in Mariupol. We got a house on the left bank and we lived here for a long period of time before the full-scale invasion. And I was working with the military to really, I didn't realize until I sort of started working with the military that I was really, the training I'd had was exceptionally good in the British Army, which allowed me to get promoted through the ranks. So I was alive here, and I was expected to sort of the last 6 months of my contract when Russia invaded, really.
Wow. And so you were in Mariupol when they invaded, is that right?
Yeah, I was on a routine deployment on December 2021. So I'd already been in the trenches 3 months before the invasion. But this was my fourth tour on the front line. So like I said, I'd commanded a position in the same area the year before. I'd worked in Slavyansk and Novolugansk. And so it was my first rodeo. I was pretty much, experienced by the time Russia invaded. And I had my own sort of section to work with. We were about 800 meters forward of the first line on the day of the invasion. So I really was at the tip of the spear. I didn't realize that until sort of 5 days later. But I was actually in the trench sort of December the year before.
Wow. And talk us through your experiences then of fighting in Mariupol. What was happening? How did you understand how things were going? I get a sense that, because I feel this myself, I almost have forgotten, and that's absolutely freaking terrible. I almost forgotten Mariupol because it seems everything's happening all the time. My head can only take so much stuff, and I'm taking all this information, and then I go back and watch 20 Days in Mariupol, and I'm like, oh my God, of course, how freaking terrible. And then I remember every single day reporting on and looking into the horrific stuff that was happening in Mariupol. And it's so easy for humans to just move on to the next thing, even within something like one subject like the war in Ukraine. So how remind us about, what Mariupol was all about for you.
Well, about a week before the invasion, 2 weeks before the invasion, the press started to move out of Mariupol, and that was a really good indication that something was going to happen. And in January, just before the invasion, I managed to get some leave home, and I think the general consensus is with Ukrainians that it wasn't going to happen. You've got to remember, every year for 5 years I was there, the Russians were coming across the border. The Russians are coming. They never did.
Sorry to interrupt, but is that what happened? Because I was going to ask you this. What were your views before February the 20th? What were your views on whether the Russians would attack then?
I was pretty confident. I mean, I was still
confident they would.
Yeah. Because it was different. You can't keep an army on the border, and it was just getting ever bigger. So, we had 180,000 people on the border. When I saw that rise above 200,000, and I just knew it was going to happen. But you talked to, I think, a lot of Ukrainians I spoke to. I don't know generally, but at that time, generally, most of them were going, no, it's not going to happen. It will sort itself out. Even my wife wanted to spend $7,000 on a new kitchen in Mariupol, on a house on the left bank. And I was thinking, I don't know about this one. I just don't really know. So it was very, very much that was the general consensus. But when I went onto the front line, the technology had changed, and I knew it was going to happen. Suddenly, DPR and ragtag forces and separatists were able to drop ordnance at night. Suddenly we were having Russian drones flying over 2 weeks before the full-scale invasion date. Artillery started to pick up. So I knew by then, 2 or 3 weeks before the invasion, that they were prepping to invade. It was clearly obvious on the front line, because suddenly the technology changed. They were using artillery to bomb Telekivka, a village behind our position, to cut us off from Mariupol. They would already started bombing the HQ and everything else, picking out targets, blowing the post office and all the government buildings up around that area. So we knew it was going to happen. We just had to wait for the day, really, which is that's the anxiety of that is quite hard. You know, you do it a million times, what we call a stand to in the British Army. And you know, that's a state of readiness when you're a full-scale attack, and you do lots and lots and lots of these drills on exercises and training. And this time we had to do it for real on the 24th of February. You know, it's 4 o'clock in the morning. We stood to, and you know, and I've got to be honest, I was sitting there thinking, this is the Russians. This is not the, you know, the Taliban. This is not going from a safe patrol harbor in Afghanistan. You know, not to take anything away from them boys, but we've now been living in a ditch for 4 months, and 3 or 4 months, and now we're starting a war with the Russians. So, you know, you can't get away from it. And straight away, you know, we know who we were dealing with. I did an interview with Sky just before the invasion, sort of saying, you know, we'll give them a bloody nose. We knew exactly how capable the Ukrainians were, because we'd worked with them for 5 years, trained with them for 5 years, but pretty much everyone had written them off. So we knew how good they were. We were pretty confident we'd give them a bloody nose. And I was sort of on Sky News sort of saying that just before the invasion, which got me a lot of attention.
Yeah, and then they attacked, and then you're pushed back, and then, you know, Mariupol becomes this, you know, famously becomes this holdout for the Ukrainians, which eventually leads you to you getting captured. Talk us through that experience.
Well, we'd on the first day of the full-scale invasion, I knew pretty much from the battle picture that we wouldn't stay in that position. We'd do a fighting withdrawal back to Mariupol and defend from Mariupol, because it's both sides got, you know, don't really have enough people in the trenches to man those trenches and fight a battle. So, and the artillery, the Grad, and they had fought air superiority straight from the off. So we were just getting, you know, smashed quite a lot. I was really quite surprised when we pulled back off the position after the first day to have a bit of a rest. And we hadn't lost anybody in our platoon. But I know on the left flank, it was crushed, and already they were taking prisoners and moving in through towards Chermalik and places like this. So, you know, we knew that we would go back to Mariupol, and over the course of sort of several days, we pushed back to Mariupol, and really did fighting withdrawal, where I was then defending Illicit Steelworks on the north sort of part of Mariupol, and then the northwest part, I was on the actual H20 highway going out towards Donetsk. So you can see the big orange line on there. That's there where the highway goes out. So we were not far to the right of that, around the Illicit Steelworks. So our brief was to hold that as they thought the Russians would be coming in down that, and we would get the full force of it. But we held out for 7 weeks, and the command and control was exceptionally good. But unfortunately, you know, 60% of my platoon by April were in hospital with shrapnel or killed, and they had fought air superiority, which was demoralising in itself. The standard of infantry troops weren't too good, but they solely relied on mobile artillery, mortars, and air, you know, air superiority. So we would just get smashed.
I've heard you say previously that the Russians were just hammering positions, but not particularly intelligently so. I mean, this is a stage of the war where the Russians had phenomenal amounts of ordnance. And so you've talked previously about like being quite near to a point where they're attacking with a mortar, but then they had attacked exactly the same spot the day after. And that, you know, it was no kind of like thinking about what they're going to try and hit and be clever about it. It's just like, yeah, I'm just going to throw the same mortar.
Going through the motions. Yeah. I mean, we had a big embankment and a railway line and an embankment and a bridge near us. So we were quite heavily fortified in that position. And, you know, despite the fact they're coming with 8, 10 and then 20 guys in the same route in, just get smashed and then pull back, when the mortars actually did come I use the scenes because everyone relates to the end scenes of Saving Private Ryan. They were coming in through walls. They were 30 meters away. They were in our positions that we formerly held. So when the mortars did come in, I thought they would really tear us apart. And this one particular time, they must have spent 2 or 3 days bombing the same position in the safe area right in front of our embankment, with no bracketing, no moving forward of the mortars and creeping them forward. It was just looked like they were going through the motions. And I was thinking by the second day, they must be coming into the compound now. No, it was the same all day. Bits and mortars were coming in. They were just going through the motions, and they would just blow up in front of the embankment in the safe area where we didn't get too much shrapnel or any problems. It was a real mishmash of degrees of expertise. And they were solely reliant on the mobile artillery, tanks and artillery pieces, mortars, and air superiority.
And what then led to you getting captured then? So there's this sense of they are just creeping forward. They are using all those advantages and the numerical advantage, the artillery and air advantage. Eventually, it all starts falling apart.
Well, after 7 weeks, we got the nod. I was quite on the extremities of Illichar, so it was easy for me to try and get out. And by then, we were just down to our bare bones. No food, very little water. 60% of the platoon, like I said, were in hospital, injured or killed. So it was decided that we would try and break out of Mariupol. Unfortunately, during the breakout, we were ambushed, and this ambush separated us all. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning when we finally left. It was dark, and when the ambush did happen, we got about 40 minutes on some Mad Max lorries before we were hit by aircraft and then artillery and then small arms fire, and then it was quite quick that we were ambushed. So we all got split up on the ambush. I lost my platoon. I helped a guy who's since died in captivity into a building, and then made the decision to go and try and find my platoon or get back to friendly lines, because I really, after 7 weeks of fighting, came out without a scratch. I was so lucky. And then about 2 hours outside Mariupol, I was captured by DPR forces. I was trying to break the first lines so I could get past them and get to friendly lines in possibly Zaporizhzhia, which was probably about 250 kilometer to hike. And I was, I didn't have any water, but I felt pretty optimistic. It was a good day, and unfortunately, I couldn't get past the first line of the Russians. By that time, it circled all of Mariupol. So, and it's very hard without a drone, or you can't really walk at night because of the mine threat, and you haven't got any drone or thermals with you, so you can't really pick up on people. So you're trying to go and use dead ground to go through strip woods, but every soldier in the world's in a strip wood or a dead ground or a building, so you got to be really careful. So I was always up against it, and I got captured about 2 hours by DPR forces, who then really started my process into being captured.
So, like, as soon as you were captured, I presume you just did you go into your seer mode, into your training? Or what were you thinking? What were your hopes and thoughts as soon as you were captured?
Well, I'd actually got into seer mode before. I'd saved the last meal. I'd started to strip down my gear. I realised that at 48, I was not going to be able to do a 200-kilometer tab with weapons, ammunition. Especially after 7 weeks of fighting with virtually no food or water anyway. So I wasn't going to be able to do that that sort of hike. So I'd already started getting into that frame of mind. I had a plan that I would surrender if I was captured to a Russian officer, but that didn't go well either. And on the day the evacuate, where we tried to break out of Mariupol, the day before foggy. The day I tried to get out was crystal blue skies, the warmest day of the year, and the weather gods weren't really with us at that point. So I was always up against it. So I'd already started to think about where I was going to get my water, because water was my major concern, not food. And I needed some things like my phone, because I'd spent a large time teaching Ukrainians not to use social media, turn your phone off. And there was me, hypocritical, decided to take my phone because I needed to get through to the other side. If I was to get that distance, I needed to let somebody know I was coming in. So, I needed to document as well. I made it a conscious decision to document and blog on what was happening in Mariupol. So I wanted to take that evidence with me and try and smuggle that too. And and my last call to my wife was "Live, Fight, Survive," which is what the book's titled for. So I already had that on my, I had something to live for, something to fight for, and my wife sort of said, just tell the boys they're doing a great job. I thought she was going to break down and crying, and in the last call where I just sort of said, it's over, we're done for, I think. But it was about 2 weeks later when I actually made that last call to when I actually tried to get out and break out. So it was really dark time, but she was very strong woman, and just told me to start screaming at me down the phone, "Live, fight, survive, tell the boys do an amazing job. You guys have put Mariupol on the map. You're in the worst area." She started telling me everything to try and help me get out and keep my motivation going. So, and then when we did go, like I said, I was captured in about 2 hours outside the DPR forces, who then promptly took me to a company-sized area where that was my first real, got my first real hammering, really. I wasn't captured. I was then mugged, as I put it, and they took all my gear. And then I realized that I had a lot of expensive gear on me that most, Ukrainian soldiers couldn't afford. So I had Garmin's watches, lower boots, and cargo belts, and condor hats, buffalo fleeces, which was already attracting attention by the guys that had captured me. And then I was handed from them to Russian regulars, because the DPR are not the best quality soldiers. They wear 3 sets of camouflage, and my pet hate is what I tell everybody, and they're pretty sloppy, and they got rigs that they've stolen.
Just to let people know, the DPR is Donetsk People's Republic. They are the militia that have actually now subsequently been taken, supposedly taken under formally taken under the Russian army as, I think, a part of the Russian army. But at this stage, they were much more the militia that is supposedly kind of the freedom fighters for the Donbass, or in this case for Donetsk. You've got the LPL, which is the Luhansk version of these people. But they generally, at least at the beginning of the war, particularly had much poorer equipment. They were very much the poor cousins of the former Russian army that came in.
Yeah, for sure. And when they captured us, they stole everything and then handed me over to Russian regulars, who are a totally different breed, different coloured tape, full Russian fatigues, fast helmets, Gucci mics and ear defenders, and nice vests, multi-tools, chem lights. They had all the gear. They just didn't have patches on, but I could see they were Russians. And they promptly tortured me, took me back to what we refer to as a tiled room. What you'll hear me talk about is names that we give these places because we don't know where they are, and it takes us back to a point in time, like a reference point. So one of them is called the tiled floored room, which is it's like a bathroom floor wet room with a drainage hole in the middle, which is easy to clear up blood and mess, and if you're going to interrogate people. So I was taken to, the Russians took me to this room, which was like that, and it promptly straight away electrocuted me with what's called a tappet.
Before we go on to that, I just want to get into your mindset of your, this is right, you're going to be tortured, I presume, and you think there's a couple of things I'm interested in. One is that you're a British guy, and so therefore I assume you must think you have a greater value than, say, you talk about the 19-year-old train driver from Mariupol that you incarcerated with. That you must be thinking, is there a sense that I've got at least a fighting chance of making it through this because I'm a British soldier and I have a value in terms of PR and in exchange? Was that ever on your mind?
Yeah, there's some element in that, because I'd already started prepping. When I got captured, they promptly stabbed me in the leg to stop me running away. Well, first of all, you always talk the best chance of escape is in transit between A and B, but unfortunately that was just ruled out when they initially captured me by stabbing me in the leg.
That's so cynical. Yeah, I guess so clever.
Yeah, straight away. Then you're dealing with professionals because they already know when you're going to try and get out, and if you're going to try and get out. And then also go back to what you're saying. Yeah, I'd already made a decision because I learned Russian initially, not Ukrainian, because I lived in Mariupol. My wife's from Crimea. Generally, we spoke Russian as well. My wife speaks Ukrainian as well, and English. And but generally, people spoke. So I understood. I wasn't fluent, but I understood a bit of Russian, which was great. So I was able to make that decision to say, I'm English when I was initially captured. Don't shoot. Hopefully to get them on the back foot. So I'd already programmed it and thought I'm not going to get through that tactical filtration phase because my Russian isn't good enough. I speak Russian with a Cockney accent. So they're going to straight away pick up on, hold on a minute, is West London Ruski? No, I don't think so.
No, it's Roman Abramovich. I'm Roman Abramovich, although you do end up meeting him.
Yeah. Dobry, yeah, you know, yeah. But yeah, it's just, so I'm not going to get through that filtration process. So I knew straight away I had to try and get them on the back foot, which was to say I was English. Maybe they wouldn't shoot me then. But if I'd said I'd worked in Azov, or I understood the culture here, I understood what to say, when to say it. I understood Russian culture, Ukrainian culture to a degree. I'm not an expert, as my wife keeps telling me. What do you know about Ukraine? So, but I understand more than most people. I've been living here for 5-6 years. So I understood what to say, when to say it, what not to say. So when they were asking me things like, you're a mercenary, you're Azov, you're a Nazi, I was like, no, I'm telling the truth. I was a Marine. I've been a Marine for 2.5 years. What I didn't do was sort of tell them all the details of my life beforehand and what I was doing and who I was working with. And you have to be a bit clever with it. But that's all my SEER training before.
Yeah, because part of SEER training is, as I understand it, to try, if you're going to have a narrative, if you're going to make something up, you want to keep it as close to the truth as possible. Or, you know, if you're not going to be truthful, make it as truthful as, but do you know what I mean? So actually some version of the truth is actually much easier to keep hold of. Is that right?
Exactly. One was manufactured for me. I didn't go in with the cover story. I didn't really have anything to tell them, to be honest. We'd evacuated the position. Most of my platoon was on the run. There was not much I could tell them the battle was over, because I said to you, command and control was actually good until April the 13th. So, you know, we'd had plans as Westerners. If it all goes to shit, I said, we're going to try and get out of here. You know, we're going to meet in my house and try and get out of Mariupol, because we don't know how command and control, even the most motivated person doesn't know how it's going to go in the heart of battle. And also when you're captured, the motivated person also goes his down days. So we didn't really know how long we were going to last in Mariupol. It was quite clear we were encircled, nobody was coming in, but actually command control was really good for my platoon anyway, certainly. So you know, I didn't have a problem with that. But I you know, when you're captured, it's very difficult to you have to have some principles, really. One of them is, as well, it taught me, we have different terminologies from when I was captured, but I tell people now, you've got to hold your head up high and say I did a good job. Well, you know, we'll talk about it later, but we did a good job. We held out for 7 weeks. Part of that is you don't shit on your mates. You delay information. You're always going to crack eventually, but you need to be a bit savvy and a bit smart with it as well. To understand the next phase that's coming. I mean, my first effort was to get through that initial capture without being injured. Or I got stabbed in the leg and electrocuted, but generally I was pretty in good health going into Donetsk and the black site, we call it. So, you know, that tiled room was where a lot of the tactical questionings came in, with the electrocutions, the tasers, beaten to a pulp. And as long as I didn't die of a heart attack, as what I say, I knew I was going to be moved on, because I could hear people talking in Russian behind me. So they were getting all the information from social media. So it already naturally went into SEER mode anyway. And I think that's a lot to do with your character. You know, don't get me wrong, I was scared and petrified, dribbling and telling people that, you know, but there's nothing really I could tell them that was worth any good.
That's the thing, right? Is that you aren't some kind of commander up there that has this overall knowledge of positions and things, right? You have limited knowledge of what's going on, and actually that's probably the same for 99% of the people they capture, and they will know that. I would assume they might glean little bits from here and there, but by the time they get that, as you say, it's probably too late for it to be particularly useful. So what do you think? I know for you it comes about this trial and whatnot later, but maybe now, or for just in general, why do you think they torture so many people? Like, what is is there something demented about the psychology, or is it just the hatred of the other, and so you're trying to break them down? What's going on?
Well, only in hindsight, like you touched on the trial. I mean, take the Crocus massacre, for instance, in Russia at the moment. I mean, I've been pretty vocal on Twitter about it because now it's in your face. It's been hidden and they've denied it. But now it's there. It's out in the open. And I tell people, look, I told you that's what they do. I told you. I wrote about it. You know, everything they just did to them and put it on social media. And they're very good at that. They're very good at videoing the torture. There's a one of me they showed me, and it'll be out there somewhere. And I'm hoping one day I'll find it because that's more evidence. And I'll be so happy to sort of see it. And because it's about that systematic torture. People going about war crimes. I'm not ignorant to say that Ukraine doesn't commit war crimes. War crimes happen. It's some people are opportunists. Some people want to enrich themselves through war. It happens. The difference between Russia and Ukraine is it's systemic. It's coming down from the Kremlin, all using 100%. The same apparatus, actually sticking it into buildings and having torture areas solely built to electrocute, rape, and this is not good. And this is where I talk about now. I just be careful. I'm just careful with my words because, like you, I get on my soapbox and I'm effing and blinding all over the place. So, but now with things like the Crocus massacre, I'm able to talk about it. I say, well, actually, Russia don't use that torture. Not for me, certainly, and probably not for them. They want you to say, I am guilty at the trial. Because then, one, they've got you for 25 years, and it's legal. And then they can put you through the death penalty if they just want to get rid of you without any repercussions. And there is no trial because it's all trial by public opinion. One of the biggest things I talk about is Russia today. They are complicit in our mental torture. We weren't given a choice. The hood was removed. They were there. And we had, you are a Nazi. You're at this. It's trial by public opinion. The same as these guys are probably getting in Russia right now. It's they want public opinion. So what they do is they put a Western accented media guy into the room with you who tells you you're a Nazi because they want it to resonate out to the Western world. And that is the only reason they do it. So I had Roman Kozyrev. Aidan Aslin had Graham Phillips, an English guy. Now, it's solely PR propaganda. The reason they do that is because they want it to go out to the Western world. And only in hindsight after, I think, they want information. They're going to call me a mercenary. They're going to blah, blah, blah. But once you start going through the process, you start to realize really quickly that this is trial by public opinion. There's nothing you could really do about it. You know the outcome of the trial that's coming. You know you're going to get the death penalty anyway. And unfortunately, that's how Russia uses torture because it's about getting you to admit things that you probably wouldn't have done. And if you ask somebody who's probably got more statistics than me, how many Ukrainian POWs actually say guilty at the trial, it's because of the torture.
Yeah. Because
it's really good way of getting you to say, yeah, I did it, because you just want the kickings and the beatings and the electrocutions and the stabbings and the starvation. Starvation is the worst by far. You just want that to stop. And that's where now I'm able to sort of talk to as well. One bloke said, oh, here comes the torture expert. And I was like, yeah, it's not sort of something I want to...
Yeah, interesting.
It's not a name tag I really want to take around with me today.
Yeah, that's me. So
yeah, that's
you've just to rewind in case some people don't know, and particularly people outside the UK. So Aidan Aslin's quite famous in the UK for being captured as well and tortured and released. But he, like you said, his person was that was with him to kind of interview him. Was Graham Phillips, who is a UK journalist, a bit like Patrick Lancaster, these kind of people that end up on the wrong side of morality and the wrong side of politics. And then, I would say journalist is a very much a generous term to call them, but he is, I would say not a good human being. In fact, he's been involved in a war crime himself in one of the an interview he did of someone being tortured, rather similar to Aidan Aslin, another time in his so-called career. So dubious person, as was, I'm sure, your one as well. So you've got these, you're being tortured. You are. I don't know if there's a difference between the torture you had at the beginning to what you had further through because you're going towards a trial that you can tell us about. But you know, you've given up, I presume, very little that's useful for them. You are just a tool in the PR campaign. You're a tool in the Russian narrative, the fight to establish their narrative in the international press. Is that how it is? Yeah.
100%. Yeah. And they do it to the point that you'll move to another prison before your trial, maybe 2 or 3 days before, where they then move you to another prison where they try and fatten you up for the trial. Everything is geared to torture
what,
you.
So you don't look too emaciated. So you look like they treated you okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Yeah. So you get 2 or 3 days at prison where you're sort of expect. I mean, I was transferred from the black side to Makivka 97, Devet Nostro Sim, and basically there started to receive what I would consider what normal POWs would get and how they would be treated. It was quite of a culture shock to be here, but because you got to imagine, from April the 13th till roughly June the 9th, I was in an isolation cell for several days, which is all torture, mental torture. So it's got a light on 24 hours a day. There's a buzzer that wakes you up, puts you to sleep. It's 1 meter by 3 meter. I was stopped food quite early on, 2 or 3 days into my captivity. So all they fed me was a bit of bread at 10 o'clock in the morning. And if I was pulled out for propaganda at 9 o'clock, then I wouldn't get the bread. I wouldn't eat for the day. And I went for 2 or 3 days of those early stages where I just didn't get any. They were just pulling me out every day, and I didn't get any bread. And it was only because one of my the guys I was with just tried to barter and get some food for it. He kept it for me. Wow. Which I was immensely grateful for. But food then becomes a commodity in the prison. So you want to be really careful about that, because suddenly food's like money. And what the whole job of the Russian, when they capture it, is to put the conflict on you and your colleagues, because it's not on them. So using food as a tool is a great way to start bringing conflict to the actual prisoners, and torture. And then they try and coerce you to say he's talked, and they'll put a TV in one person's room or give him a bit more. And they're constantly on these games of creating conflict within the prison between the prisoners, so that it's not on the prison guards.
And so just to reiterate, the whole point of this is, like, even at these early like, all they want is for you to say that you're some kind of Nazi, or that you're like, what do they want everyone to be saying? What's the goal?
Exactly. First of all, it was made clear to me that they wanted Britain to actively talk to the Donetsk People's Republic. So I was made to do videos for Boris Johnson, and they wanted me to talk to the government, the Foreign Office. They wanted to talk to key personnel. They were trying to get recognition that they were the Donetsk People's Republic, and I knew straight away that that's what they were trying to do. They were trying to get some recognition, and they were using us as a tool to do it, a conduit to do it. But we knew the British government wouldn't talk to terrorists or puppet states, so we knew this was a dead end. But what we really good at doing was telling the world where we were, what we were doing. We weren't allowed to say or talk about the site. We weren't allowed to really discuss our situation and how badly we were being captured, because we were constantly threatened, beaten. I had threatened because I hadn't done Boris Johnson done a scary enough looking video to look like I was scared. They threatened to cut off my finger. And I mean, it sounds funny, but it's just because I laugh, because the guy who was running and looking after us understood British sarcasm. And so I could sort of get away with a bit of comedy, sort of say things like, no, it's all right, I've got this covered, you don't need to do that, and he'd laugh and things like that, and try and build a rapport at an early stage. And then the propaganda was solely built for that. Then it started to change. We realized we had a value because Viktor Medvedchuk, because they were looking to swap us for Viktor Medvedchuk,
who they ended up have swapped now. He was a guy that was captured who was touted to be like the puppet leader of Ukraine. Had Russia taken the whole of Ukraine, then he was captured. I can't remember exactly where, but he was then swapped for a bunch of prisoners.
That was us, yeah. He swapped for us eventually. So
Oh, was us right? Sorry, I should have known that. Oh my goodness, yeah.
No. He swapped for us. So I think they got a really good deal actually. Ukraine, they got like 150 Ukrainians out and 8-10 foreigners for Victor Medvedchuk and about 55 Russian officers. So generally, you won't get exchanged in the Russian military unless you're an officer. Then you will only get exchanged if you're connected. So you won't get out.
Wow.
So they really don't care about their guys and their citizens. So, you know, we got a good exchange out of that. But yeah, we knew straight earlier that we were going to be exchanged. We could be exchanged. So again, your morale and hope kicks in, and hope's a big one when you've got nothing else. You know, sometimes all you've got is hope. So you have to keep hoping that you're going to keep going.
Well, there's a couple of things on this I want to say, but I want to rewind a little bit because you just mentioned having some kind of rapport with the guard. I'm interested whether, look, what these guards are like. Are they? I mean, they're humans, obviously, like they're human specimens, but they must have lives. They must have friends and family and a life outside of what they're doing there. So how do they? Do you think that they compartmentalize stuff so much, and can you play on their humanity at all? Did you actually spark up any rapport with any of these people who were doing otherwise horrific things, or at least facilitating horrific things?
Not the guys whose job it is to torture you. They really don't care about whether you live or die. And at the black site, that's solely from April the 13th till the first weeks in June was solely built for torture. Those are trying to emphasize the cell was torture. The light, no darkness was torture. No windows so you could gauge anything. Dehumanization, disorientation. You know, they were very, that's what those sites are solely built for. You're not going to make any friends there. But when we did meet some people like lawyers and prosecutors, and there were some people that just didn't like the way we were being treated. My mum always had a good saying, good people are good people, even if they're on the other side of the fence and think Putin's fantastic. Generally, good people are good people. And it sounds bad, but my job at that point, survival, was to really exploit those and find those people. Because, and I didn't look at anything as other as good enemy, basically. And you know, it's only since I've been released that I could say, yeah, actually, there was just some generally good people who didn't like the way we were being treated. And knew we had nothing, that we were being beaten and starved, and managed to get us stuff and bribe guards and managed to sort of help us out, which I won't forget those people. One of them, strangely enough, was a DPR guy who fought in Debaltseve. He was very careful how he talked to me, but he didn't need to help me. And it was my first look at a third group of people in there. He believed in a Donetsk People's Republic, and he didn't want to be a part of Russia. And he was inside for writing things about Pushilin. He was in the same prison as me, and he'd got 4 years just for writing some stuff about Pushilin on social media. And he fought in Debaltseve, and he was pro Donetsk People's Republic. But when I got in, and I was on really in a bad way, I'd got dysentery through lack of food, and then suddenly I had first food, and then I got really ill, and John Harding was looking after me. And it was him that gave me vitamins, water, cigarettes, coffee, and his family bought stuff in, clothes for me, t-shirt, flip-flops. He said, we're not all monsters.
Oh, wow. So that's, and you're referring to Denis Pushilin, who's a leader of the DPR, basically.
Yeah.
Sorry, you were going to say I should read something.
No, it's, I mean, it was totally unexpected, and I was very careful because we was in prison, but you know, he helped me, even to, like, when I'd hear him out in the courtyard, he would shout through the wall, Shaun, have you got a telly yet? You know, and I was like, no. You know, and there's people like that, humanity.
Yeah.
The humanity in some people.
Okay, then let's go to the other side. So those people who were just, their job was to torture, are these just, I mean, I'm interested, I don't know that you would know the answer to this, but what are your speculations? Are these just broken humans? Are they people that genuinely hate you for like what they see as justified reasons, or are they just psychopaths? And because they're psychopaths, they're drafted into that kind of job. Like, what is it? Like, are they getting joy out of torturing you? Well, first of all, is that a thing? Do they get joy out of torturing you in some kind of way? And is it because they have dehumanized you because they see you as the enemy? I don't know.
Their character's probably the reason they've been captured. I later learned that the prison, the black site, was run by the MGB, which is like the Donetsk People's Republic's version of the FSB, the former KGB. So those people would have been picked on character and a strong believers, I would assume. But the guards in that prison were old has-beens that didn't look like they could get through a trench anymore, that were probably getting paid very decent money working for the military, the Ministry of Internal Affairs in DPR. And also a mixture of young lads that looked like they were just cutting their teeth, really. And they could work out 3 times a day and, torture prisoners. And, so they do have a degree of love. One of them I refer to as Captain Shovelhands. He had a real big love of pain, and because he used to beat his own guys up, which was, so he had an absolute love of pain. But generally the culture, even when I went to Ukraine and in Russia, is that they don't really put any value in NCOs. So generally section commanders in the old days were just big brutes of guys who could beat 10 people up in a section, 8 people up in a section. And that's how you got promoted. They didn't really have the intelligence or the value of NCOs that the British Army has. So generally, when you get to a guy who's a Lance Corporal, equivalent Lance Corporal or full screw, is generally a man mountain, and you have to deal with that. I mean, even my platoon commander, he's an amazing bloke and embrace Western tactics, but even he's a Ukrainian strongman. I mean, they're a different breed out here. So it's I mean, that's generally NCOs. You pick the guys that are able to, and the Russians were exactly the same. The Russians would promote guys just based on brute strength, size, and their ability to command through force, and that's generally how they pick their NCOs.
So in your time being tortured, there's this element of like having to deal with 2 things. So one is these things that these people are doing to me for whatever reason they're doing it, and I need to somehow survive that, but I have very little control over that. Maybe I can control it a little bit by how I interact with them and what I tell them, but my control there is quite small. And then I have the torture that is my own psychological torture that I'll be experiencing in those down times or any particular time, I guess. And I can maybe have some control of that because it's my own thought processes and mind. What are your thoughts on those 2 different types of tortures, if you like?
Well, you have system-induced pressures and self-induced pressures, and at the very early stages, it's majority system-induced pressures that you're working with. You don't really get time to think about anything else other than being dragged out, doing propaganda, tortured, beaten, working out where you're going to get the next bit of food from. Where's the easiest path to not get beaten and tortured to get your next bit of food from? But you got to remember, I was the only guy that had any training in it. Yeah. So I was with NGOs. Who didn't really know any Russian, didn't really have any military background, and one of them unfortunately died in captivity. So we had to pick ourselves up from that. So as long as your principles, generally, you've got to have good principles, and that is you don't shit on your mates, you keep the weaker members going, you try and if you know more than you're letting on, like I couldn't tell people I'd done training. I couldn't talk to them about my time in the British Army or what I'd done in the Marines, because what the Russians would do with when you go out and do propaganda, or you're going out to do something medical, or you're going to the court or something like that, what they would do is go into the cell and beat the guys up in the cell. I'd try and get information that you might have told them. So nobody was your friend in prison. So you didn't want to save their lives. You couldn't really talk about that. So I couldn't really tell anybody my past, but then I became sounding board. So my time when I got captured quite quickly became my thing to get intelligence. And suddenly over sort of several months of captivity, really it started to become like the Great Escape. There was 2 or 3 good, strong guys we were with, and we started to get intelligence and information. 2 of the guys, the Swede, could speak fluent Russian. Brahim Sadun, who's an amazing guy, from Morocco, he could speak Russian, Ukrainian, English, French, Arabic. I mean, he was a very intelligent guy, and we had to really sort of.
So what were they doing there? These Moroccans? I've heard you mention.
Whereas one Moroccan lad who's in our battalion, who was studying electrical engineering in Kiev University, decided sign up to the Marines. I mean, he was 21. He's about 5'2", very intelligent lad. But you get a lot of that. People that were living here, expats, people that are married to Ukrainians, people that weren't necessarily born here, now wanted to fight for Ukraine against those false narratives. And I was one of them. You know, people call me a mercenary. Hold on a minute. I pay my taxes in Ukraine. I'm married to Ukrainian. My family's Ukrainian. I have a house on the left bank. I haven't been home since 2018. Someone actually put, you should ban his citizenship from Great Britain. I said, I served 9 years in my country. Why? You know, I'm constantly fighting these. People just can't understand. As far as people are concerned, people that are foreigners, are mercenaries, are people like people that come to the country looking for a better life from Syria or Afghanistan. They understand that. What people don't really understand about is the people that go to Spain for retirement, or the people that go and find a wife who comes from another country and they settle in that country. I've met so many British expats living in Ukraine that are not connected to the military at all, but just married a Ukrainian and lived there because it's a better life. And, you know, it's just people can't seem to get their hats on. I was working for the Ukrainian government in the Marines. You know, I was a Marine. I'd learned Russian first. This drives Russian propagandists nuts because it's like, well, he learned Russian, you know. It's like, well, my point is, as a Russian speaker, the only persecution I've ever received as a Russian speaker is from Russia, and I live in Ukraine.
So I guess I guess it's like people see Ukraine, and I've had this criticism before of people who say, oh, it's NATO encroachment and that's what started the war. People see Ukraine as through the prism as only being a political football between the Soviet Union, now Russian Federation, and evil NATO and EU and American imperialism, rather than saying, well, actually, it's its own thing and it has its own people and its own political system and own identity
language
and culture and language, etc., etc. So let's stop saying it's it's NATO's fault or whatever. And let's say, well, actually, what did Ukraine want to do? Did it want to go closer to the EU and NATO, or did it want to go closer to Russia? Well, if it's choosing itself to go closer to the EU and NATO, that's not necessarily NATO encroachment. It's a voluntary organization, unlike the Warsaw Pact, right? And what about the Russian involvement? Anyway, that's a big side note. But the idea is that you are being seen, or someone like you is being seen through that same prism. Is like, you must be going to Ukraine because it's nothing to do with Ukraine. I can only understand you going to Ukraine through something to do with Russia or something to do with the UN, and therefore,
exactly. Even Ukrainian papers or the Ukrainian online media, they put Britain, ex-British servicemen who fought for Ukraine. Nothing about, I was a Marine, lived here since 2018. It's sensationalism. And, you know, I get a lot of people just don't acknowledge that I've lived here since 2018, pay my taxes. Just to focus on the fact that I'm not born here. By legal definition, I'm not a mercenary. For one thing, I have residency in the country that I'm in. I haven't stepped foot out of it. Russia invaded. How can I be a mercenary in the country I'm in? I mean, it's like, it's stupid to think that. Only Russian logic calls you a mercenary in your own country.
So going back to torture again, you were talking about like fighting to get through to your next bit of food or something. Do you start like cutting up the day into survivable chunks? Does your whole goal, kind of, I guess, you know, you set yourself goals, and they're not big goals like I might have with my, like, how I want my life to go and my children. And you, like, when you're in that very small place, your goals are 1 hour, 12 hours, 24 hours. Is that how you get through the day?
Yeah, you have to. I teach now schools and talk to them about the guys that set these training programs. So, you know, I talked about you sometimes several times an hour, you're assessing each situation as you go along, which, you know, you could be pulled out and meet somebody new. You really are looking at each day at that early stage and breaking that down into hours, and then sometimes minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes. And it does get easier. It should get easier. The system introducing pressures at the early stages are horrendous by any means. But I think the worst pressures are self-induced. What can you do to someone that you've just sentenced to death at the trial? Russians know that, so they leave you in a cell for 2.5 months for 24 hours a day. So you're then battling self-induced pressures. And I talk to people about what led me to go and find some happiness in my life. You know, I'd got to a point of depression before I came to Ukraine. A bar that I said I didn't want to go to ever again. And it might sound weird, but at no point through fighting and doing all the stuff that I've done, I'd ever hit that bar. Because one thing, fighting's fighting. I'd already come to terms with death several times in Mariupol, seeing my best friends die, but I'm a believer. And it was only a psychologist afterwards said, yeah, we think believers actually do all right in these things because you're a believer, you're quite happy to lay down your life for what you believe in your country. So you come to accept that very, very quickly. And one of the things I write about,
what do you mean by believer?
Well, I as part of a sort of before the full-scale invasion, I wrote in my book, actually, there are 3 types of people that go to work in foreign countries and fight in foreign wars. You have believers, runaways, and killers. And generally, it's very hard for people to accept that there are people in this world that just don't fit into normal life, who just like killing. And unfortunately, that's the sort of world we live in. Then you have believers, which are like me. But I wasn't always a believer. I was a runaway. And runaways are the people you didn't want to work with you. Runaways are people with warrants, drug problems, alcohol problems, trying to see Ukraine as a fix for their boring, mundane life and think it's a way out. And those are the people you don't want. YouTubers who are just there for 6 months and want to fit their war inside 6 months and then go home. You know, oh, I've got to be home because my wife wants me home. You left your wife and kids to come here. You know, I'd spent 9 years to learn how to fight Russians. I knew exactly what they were capable of. It wasn't something I took very lightly when I did come. And when I got my first job, I was still unsure whether I was going to stay because I just knew what they were capable of doing.
So is that to say you're a believer in Ukraine? You're a believer of you're going to something. I believe in this ideal that Ukraine stands for.
I believe in this ideal, yeah. And Mariupol's my home. I was married to Ukrainian. My community was then sort of broken up, and you're fighting for your home, your city, your wife, the kids, the next door's kids. You're a believer, and I've always been a believer here, in Ukraine sovereignty. So generally, I think that has a lot to do with how I handled it after my exchange, for sure. I'd come to terms with death many times in Mariupol, I'd seen a lot of it before I was even captured. So for me, the capture phase wasn't really. I had some sort of control because I'd done training. I'd had to receive some training. I knew the phases of being captured. I knew it would get easier. I knew how to keep going and going and going. I knew it would get tough, but also I'd had 13 years in the military, 9 war tours, 4 of them being on the front lines in Ukraine. It wasn't new to me, and I think everybody knows, if you're going to get captured, something like this is probably going to happen. Look at the World War II, and things. So that things are. I knew exactly what I was going into. Another one I get was, what does he expect when he went to go and fight in other people's wars? Firstly, it was my family. Ukraine. My family's Ukraine. I lived there for a long time. Secondly, I knew. I keep replying to people. I knew exactly what I was getting into because I'd had training in it. I knew exactly what was going to be required of me. I knew exactly that I might not get out of it. And I'm very lucky to be alive just to get through Mariupol. So by the time the capture, it was something I knew a little bit about. I did some training, and then you become a leader. Then you start helping other people. Then you're trying to become a sounding board. Then you're trying to fight back in a different way inside the prison. And that's after 8 months, where we got to August, September. Largely after my trial was all self-induced pressures, and that was really hard. Some dark times going on there because you'd already been sentenced there. I didn't know all the way through for 2 months where I was just going to be pulled out of the cell and shot. So,
yeah, because I was going to ask you about this actually, because you probably had, as you said, you said you dealt with the idea of death previously in like, I could die, but there's still that probability thing. But when you're sentenced to death, it's like, no, you will die. It's just a matter of time. Now, did you?
It's just time, yeah.
Yeah. Did you think that was definitely going to happen, or did you think this was a psychological ploy and actually you're not really going to die? And B, like, how? Yeah, explain to me how you dealt with that.
You initially take each day as it comes again. You're living each day like it's your last, that's for sure. And we had already called this problem the weight. I mentioned to you before, even the most motivated person goes through ups and downs in captivity and through battle. So it's about being able to spot that. Most people refer to the black cloud. We called it the weight. And if you called it the weight, nobody had to really explain to you what the problem was. Everybody knew what it was. So generally, if somebody said, I've got the weight today, you just like try and cheer them up. You wouldn't go into depth, and it was quite an easy way of getting people to sort of say, yeah, I'm not feeling good today. And most of that would come in through thoughts of family. I'm never going to see my family again. I'd come to terms with dying, but, not seeing my son again would get me quite upset, or my father or my mum, or, what are they thinking? How am I perceived on the outside world? And you have to really knuckle down and really stop that from, happening, because you've got to firstly identify you're going down that path anyway. And then you've got to, and I described it in another podcast, we had a toilet that looked like the toilet from Train Spotting.
Right.
It's not the glamorous, but part of the time was maybe you want to go and do fill some water and clean the toilet and get going on that, because that certainly takes your mind away from the dark thoughts that are coming around. So it's about being able to discipline yourself and get yourself motivated to be able to do tasks and take your mind off those dark thoughts that come in.
But there's something interesting about that, because control is something. So when you talk about just in terms of like the psychology of happiness in general in life, having control is a really important thing for being able to therefore build up happiness. People who don't have control over their lives in generally end up, struggling. And so you take that into a prison environment, and you've just talked about, like, I can control cleaning this toilet. Like, I can do something and I can achieve it. And this is me doing that. And as minor as that might sound to us in our daily lives as we live them now, for you there, that's
a major thing.
Yeah. And that's you exerting at least some kind of control.
We had a lot of techniques. So eventually, I was trying to teach the guys to listen for key words from the prisoners that were talking outside. Odman, meaning exchange. Things like that, and teaching them Russian. So it wasn't me doing all the legwork on the window. So we got a dictionary. So we were like trying to learn words from a dictionary. We'd build chessboard out of bottle tops and a board, and scratch a board together. And so it was about keeping people busy, because I was with the same people we joke about this now, the group of us that we were in, but I was with the same people for about 4 months in a cell that was like, initially 1 meter by 3, and then in another cell that was probably 6 foot by 4 foot, with 3 other people in the same thing. I've gone to the toilet with them. I've eaten with them. I've watched them cry. I've picked them up. We've got a bond that we've got probably forever. And we don't see each other or speak to each other for 3 months, 4 months, and then suddenly we're back into it. It's like we've never been away, because we've done all through that together. And I think that bond came out in the group. I wrote about God Save the King, the incident where the Queen died, and the prison guard came to the where we do our hourly walks and said, "Your Queen's dead." Started laughing, sneered off, and it took John Harding, who's a socialist, anti-royalist, and a staunch Labour supporter, to say, "God Save the King." And it echoed through. It even sends goosebumps now. And those are the things that get me upset. That fight we had after several months in prison of "fuck you, God save the King," and then hearing a Swede, a Moroccan, 3 Americans, Brit, a Ukrainian saying "God save the King," and this just prison guard scuttled off, because I think he thought we had a picture of the Queen in our wallets or something.
Brilliant. Because I think you said previously to John Harding, who, as you said, is fervent socialist Labour supporter, not a monarchist, but he was like, yeah, but I hate the Russians more than I hate the monarchy type thing. So it's like, I pick my side.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a magic day. Those are the things that get me upset. I did a talk in Canada, and I talked like 15, 20 times about this. And I do big public speaking events. And for some reason, this one day when I talked about this story, it was the first time I talked about it. I just broke down while I was going. I said, "Excuse me, you're going to have to give me 5 minutes." But those are the right times to get upset. We had good... the Foreign Office gave us some good advice, and Hostage UK were brilliant. They were always there for me. And really, I spoke to the War Crimes Commission. It's another funny story. I spoke to the War Crimes Commission, and they were really good. And we gave our testimonies as to the War Crimes Commission, and they said part of the Met Police's rule is that we wanted to see a counsellor. So I said, okay. So I went to see the counsellor and just sort of speaking to the police and the counsellor. I said, what's your specialty? She went, sexual violence. And I went, I'm good. And this is where someone like Hostage UK comes in, and they know about this sort of scenario and situation. So we was very good at getting advice of who to speak to by the Foreign Office. I can't thank them enough, really. But they were very good at directing us to people that knew. So my point of contact was former Special Forces guy, and they understood about being in a hostage situation. And so it's about who you get advice off and who listens to you. I think a lot of I've got a good family as well, so I'm married to a Ukrainian who understands the situation out here. So generally, I've handled it a bit different.
Yeah, you have had given testimony then for war crimes to go to at least some kind of tribunal. It's interesting what you just said earlier, but you know when someone's British, because like we've been through imperial into metric, and then you're like British has gone to live in Ukraine, and you say, yeah, I was living in this 1 meter by 3 meter cell, and then next door there was a 2 foot by 6 foot cell. It's like, hang on, what's going on here? Crazy.
No, it's the same cell. We were the black site. It was a 1 meter by 3 meter, and then you've got about 3 meter by 6 meter cell where we went to Makivka 97. I probably didn't make that clear, but it was. I was with those same guys. So.
But yeah, I was interesting. I've always been interested whenever I've listened to you speak in how the prison was set up and how you talked to other prison mates, and whether you were in the same cell or whether there were just cells across, or whether you had to talk through walls. How did it figure?
The isolation cells, you obviously can't talk to anybody because it's the clues in the name, really. It's you can just hear everything going on outside, but you have no idea. You can hear people screaming, but you really don't talk to anybody. And then when I was taken into the basement at the black site, I was put into a room with 2 Ukrainians. But I also heard Paul Urey next door, and John Harding came in after he was taken out. And really, we were talking through a vent, and we weren't allowed to talk. We had to whisper, and it took me 2 weeks to pluck up the courage to John and sort of talk to him and Paul Urey. It was actually Paul Urey that told us for 2 weeks when we were captured, 2 or 3 weeks we were captured, we didn't know if Ukraine was still Ukraine. So we were talking ourselves into all sorts of stupor. And then Paul Urey came in. It took me a week or so to really pluck up the courage to talk to him. And I sort of said, what's going on in the outside? Well, he said, who's that? And I said, it's Shaun. He went, not Shaun Pinner. I went, yeah, Shaun Pinner. He went, oh, I'm fucked. He said, I just see you all over the news. And I went, oh, I'm just watching. So when he said that, I was like, what did you see? What did you see? And he was telling me about my mum, that Ukraine was still standing with Santa Moskva. And,
wow,
we're fighting back. And for that was such a powerful time in the black site that we were fist bumping, silent screaming, because there's a camera watching you 24 hours a day. We couldn't make any joy.
Oh, wow. That must I can only imagine the joy of hearing that kind of positive news. Must have been incredible.
Absolutely. 2 or 3 days we were talking about it. We're going to get where, we're going to get this, we're going to do this, we're going to get that. And it gave us so much confidence after 2 weeks of just real self-induced pressures and system-induced pressures that anybody... I mean, I was electrocuted on the ears at that time as well, which was really painful. And, I was still getting over the stabbing in my leg. And then by the time I was starved, I was just shedding weight. I was only eating about 700 calories a day, if that, every other day probably. So by the time I got to my trial, I was 60 kilos. I was looking like I was straight out of Japanese war camp, which is where, if you see the pictures of me early on, I was actually looking okay with hair. And then when they took my hair off after about 2 or 3 weeks in, you'll see the timeline of me deteriorate from that point I was captured to the time of the trial, where I was probably estimating about 60 kilos because I wasn't fed. And then I was really in bad shape by then. So you've got to keep positive. You've got to keep going. What's the point of doing SEER school and SEER training if you just give up halfway through? So part of there's a pride thing. I think it's a lot to do with character and in someone's ability to really, I became a solar panel for positivity, if you know what I mean. I just became a solar panel for any bit of positivity that came about. I was there absorbing it in, trying to keep people going, trying to keep myself going more than anything. But I was really with a good bunch of lads who all chipped in and really looked after each other. We were all in it together.
So these are some images of you. That's the guy that was swapped for you guys. But here's you with Aidan Aslin, and yeah, looking a little bit worse for wear.
You can see where I've got the blue hoodie on. You can see where I was captured. I was actually looking in good nick. You see the one next to it when I was released in the orange t-shirt. You'll see I'm visibly not being. I've just been starved, and that's just got worse and worse. I look like something out of. You can see the deterioration, and that when I've got here is like the first 2 weeks. So you can see the real deterioration in health as they just didn't feed us anything.
Yeah.
So
and with regard to Paul Urey, so he wasn't, if I remember correctly, he wasn't in the army, was he? He was just captured.
No.
So
he was. I think he was working for an NGO, and what happened was he got taken to the prosecutor's office. And during the time at the prosecutor's office, he didn't really understand the seriousness of his situation he was in, didn't speak Russian, and got beaten up severely at the prosecutor's office, and then died of his injuries 2 days later. And then we had a Roman Kazarov and the FSB turn up because we heard them say the FSB here at the prison, and they broadcasted outside our cells saying the terrorist Paul Urey died of natural causes, which we knew was absolute bullshit. He was fine, and then suddenly he had diabetes, but he was under control. It wasn't severely bad, and he was getting through, but he wasn't going to die. And he just went to the prosecutor, he came out, and he was just coughing. And when we came back from a walk, he was dead in his cell. And they were really giving him a hard time because they thought he was a spy. He was captured with a couple of passports, which attracted the attention of the Russians. So he was getting extra treatment. Plus, he was slightly overweight. Plus, he didn't understand. I watched so many people get beaten because they didn't understand basic commands in Russian. That would get them a beating. And if you get a broken arm or broken rib or broken leg in prison there, your chances of you getting through that are going to be pretty slim because the medics and the aid is just not there. There's no humanitarian aid there for us, for starters. Never saw Red Cross.
Yeah, well, so that's actually a question that I had for you. So Kevin said, did you have any contact with the outside world, letters, Red Cross, etc.?
No, nothing at all. We weren't. The only time they made us, we could ring home to tell them we were captured, and the only time we were allowed to ring home was when they wanted information about what was happening from the UK and what were my family doing to aid in my release and my exchange. And that was the only time we were allowed. They wanted something from it. And also when they wanted us to do videos. I mean, part of my SEER training is to tell people what's happening, and my condition I'm in. And I wanted to get on TV. So I didn't mind going out and doing the TV. I didn't have a choice in it, but I was certainly going to exploit the fact when we did go out to do media that I wanted anybody in the world to know the state I was in, especially as I was getting worse just before the trial. I was getting really bad because we weren't being fed, and I was looking emaciated. I mean, part of another as well is looking at your physical form. I mean, looking at your physical form is for the first time when you've been captured is awful. When they cut our hair, sort of 3 or 4 weeks, we went for a shower. One time we went for a shower, there was a mirror there, and I just remember looking at my body in the mirror, thinking, "Oh, you look bad.
Yeah,
you got ribs, your elbows are inflated. You can see your ribs. You've got no beer belly anymore. It's just saggy skin. You've got." Your muscle definition's all gone. Your back's gone straight into your leg. You've got blisters and scuts and your face. Remember, you don't have a toothbrush in prison. So for largely from April to June, we never had anything to brush our teeth with. So they were going yellow and yeasty, and I was thinking, I look really, really bad. And that's another thing to get over is your physical change and how you see that deteriorate. And then you have to fight through that as well. Not just all the beatings and the torture and everything else, but just the physical changes in your mental state you have to keep on top of you. It's real full-time work when you're captured, because if you lose the belief of why you did it, which is why I tell you believing is really important.
Yeah.
If you lose the belief and the meaning, then I've watched people just crumble. People that don't realize, you can imagine how someone was working in IT, gets conscripted, gets captured, Is he going to be a believer? Is he going to keep going? He's probably hating his government right now. And you've got to be honest with it. Generally, some people don't want to be mobilized or are scared of it. So when they're captured, are they going to keep going, or are they going to succumb to the Russian pressure? Because they do. And if you're weak, they will jump on you even more. So it's almost kudos that you take the knocks in a prison camp. You have to take and roll with the punches. Because if you're weak, they will jump on you no end.
What is being strong when you're being electrocuted and being beaten? Is being strong not showing anything, or do you want to show them that? Do you almost want to act that they've really hurt you more than they have hurt you, because then they feel like they've succeeded? Like, I have no.
Not with the electrocution, no. There's some things you can't act, and that you can't train for pain.
Well, and
the pain is real. Yeah, I mean, you're dribbling, and there's nothing. And I was petrified when they mock execution. I thought that was it. I was dead in the water. I thought that's it. My final thing is just looking at a drain in there. I really did think, and I'm not going to tell you I was brave. I was saying anything I wanted to get out, like you would.
Yeah.
But there's some times where I was punched and kicked and hit where I just thought, well, that wasn't as bad as I thought it was, and then faked it, and then but then we had small victories. That's part of your gaining the little victories.
That's that control. I can sort of control this a little bit. Yeah.
So it sounds stupid, but sometimes you make out like you're in more pain or more scared than you actually are. And you should be quite right. So you've got no control. But there are times when that's happened, and really you just take that as a moral victory. Oh, that wasn't as bad as I thought it was. Whew.
So that's interesting. So that's what were your victories on a daily basis? So that's one of them. What other things, like getting to clean the toilet?
Well, when we got our first toothbrush and toothpaste, that was amazing, and the medics brought us down that and managed to get us that at the
Why did you get that?
Because we kept asking, said, look, we need some toothpaste, we need something, and they were conscious of the fact we were going to trial, so they wanted to get us new clothes. So at that point, then when we were transferred, we knew we had leverage, we had some stuff. So we could probably get away with asking for a bit by the time we were transferred. So we got books, dictionary. We didn't get any TV or anything like that most people have in the cells there. That was not allowed. We started to push the boat out. So every time I did media, because we weren't being fed, I would ask for food. Because what became quite apparent was that they were quite skeptical of their own press as well. So they wanted to make out that they were treating us all. Right. So I knew that if I went out, and then once I got spring water, some clean water, and then I tried it with a burger, and then fags, I became the biggest media whore for cigarettes in the world. I would go out there, the first thing I go, I'm not talking to you unless you give me a box of cigarettes. And they were like, oh, here, have that. And I was like, great, I'll sit down and talk to you all day.
Yeah.
And I just to get me away from the cell, I didn't have a choice about it. It was made perfectly clear that if I didn't talk to them, they already control my food. It was made clear that I might not receive any if I don't cooperate.
So you might. I'm going to do this anyway. I'm going to speak to you anyway. So let's pretend I'm not going to get as much out of it as I can. Interesting.
But you've got to remember, I'm 50 years old. I've got a bit more understanding of people as well. So I've had a life. You imagine a 19-year-old going through this, his first experience. He's not going to handle it the same way as I've handled it, or I did it, or, he's going to handle it a lot worse. And some people aren't going to get back from this. Because it'll be on their brains forever.
You know people who've died for sure. You know people who died with you, right? Talking about Paul Urey and others. You know that, or you don't know the status of so many people that you were in prison with, or that were in your unit, or whatever. So, how do you go about tracking how people are doing? Is it, is there any way of finding out?
Not really. I put things into context. 60% of my wedding picture from Mariupol 4 or 5 years ago, 60% of the guys there are dead or captured. My wife's ex-husband's captured. My neighbours are captured. We've got lots of missing friends that are still missing. Also, my battalion's still captured. Only a handful of us got out and have been exchanged. So we keep in contact with the families. We've got group chats with the families. We try and talk to the guy I talked to. I'd never met him before till I was in prison at the Black Site with him. I talked to his mum. I found his mum because we remembered each other's phone numbers. So I was straight out contacted his mum. Made sure she was all right. And we talk regularly. We get our hopes up when we hear this exchange. And then we're picking each other up when there isn't one. And this is daily. Like everybody, 3 months ago, my wife lost a work colleague who's in our wedding video in Slavyansk. So everybody's going through this here. The loss, the pain, the captivity. I've just watched 500,000 army fight 500,000 army, and now they want to raise another 500,000 army on both sides. And we're sitting with a defense force in the UK of 70,000 people.
Yeah.
Now I talk about it's like I've just watched that happen, and it's everybody's dealing with it in Ukraine, and
goodness me, there's so much more. Every time you say something, I'm like, well, there's another half an hour of me wanting to ask you questions on that. But mate, I mean, as okay, so you're out. So we haven't even talked about you getting out of prison, being exchanged. Do you want to quickly talk us through that experience?
We were given around about 20th of September. We were told we're on a long journey, but our excitement was short-lived. So we literally were beaten and put in stress positions for about 13 hours, from 3 o'clock in the afternoon till 9 o'clock the next morning, and taken to Rostov-Don. We don't give no food and water. We were beaten. I had a scar here on my right where blood all over my face. One of the guys, when they took the hood off at Rostov-Don, his face had blown up. An American, he couldn't see out of his eyes. They'd sellotape a plastic bag too tight around his head. It cut off the blood. It just swelled out. 3 of the guys lost footwear in the scuffles, and we really didn't know where we were going. And then there was an old guy walking around, some Saudi guys, looking guys, and really just got an idea that we might be exchanged. But really didn't know until we got on the plane and they shut the doors. And then when they shut the doors, they said, provided we get out of Russian airspace, you've been exchanged, which, like, obviously we were elated and so happy. And then you put the pictures up of us on the plane going home, where we did a little snippet with Aidan saying we've been freed and got home. So very good, happy to be home after all that. And then on the plane, obviously we met Roman Abramovich, who big part of the deal. Well, actually, I was getting some clothes on. I said, "Where are you from?" He said, "I'm from London." And I said, "Where are you from?" He said, "London." And I said, "You don't look like Roman Abramovich." He said, "I am Roman Abramovich." I was like, "What are you doing here?"
So, for those who don't know, if you're American, you might have, or most people in Europe will know that he used to own Chelsea Football Club. He was a massive figure in UK society and in the news all the time for being a Russian oligarch in charge of one of our biggest, most successful football clubs at that time. And then he was then sanctioned. He had to sell Chelsea Football Club, and he was for a time involved in prisoner swaps as kind of him trying to be a bit of a I suppose keep relevant, keep up there. I don't know quite what was going on with his the motivations there, but nonetheless involved in getting you out. So that's awesome. Yeah,
then we Prince of Saudi Arabia, we're indebted to him and his hospitality in Saudi. We got full medicals, and then the British Foreign Office wanted us to go home quite quickly, so we stayed there, went home, and by the 22nd, on the 22nd of September, I was traveling into the UK, and 22nd of September was my wedding anniversary.
Wow.
So it was amazing time to fly into the country, and then I couldn't see my wife for 4 more weeks because she had to get a visa. So we were just constantly FaceTiming for about 3 weeks. Yeah, the Foreign Office were trying to fast track it through, and but yeah, I couldn't see her for 3 or 4 more weeks.
Do you think they'd say, "Do you know what? We'll get her over ourselves," or what? That's incredible. No, got to do the paperwork first. Wow,
got to do the paperwork. So
it's like being in Ukraine. No, but why? Is there anything that you felt about? Like, I'm no big nationalist, right? My idea, I get proud of what the UK is in terms of what it stands for, and the fact that I can sit here and have a YouTube channel where I can pretty much say what the hell I like, right? That's what I love about the UK, is my liberty, my freedom, and a lot of the cultural things but I'm not some jingoistic nationalist kind of guy, right? And I often wonder that if I'd been in a situation like yours, what if I came back to the UK, and I know you're no longer in the UK, you're in Poland at the moment and you're living in Ukraine, but like, is there anything about the UK that you're like, oh, thank God I'm home, or they're like, oh, I really appreciate this about the UK?
That's a really good point, because I thought I knew myself until I came to Ukraine. I think I only just really started at 45 really to understand myself. I'm 50 now. But initially, I was a Brexit guy. I worked all the hours God sends. I wanted to get out of Europe. I was fed up with rules coming out of Europe that were affecting me with work. And, I wasn't anti-immigration as such, but, I was sort of proud to be British at the time. And really, I mean, I've always been proud. I served my country. We talked about it earlier. You find a soldier that isn't a nationalist. I was very proud to be Queen and country, and I loved going home to London. I was very proud to take my wife to London on my exchange. That was her first trip. So I was able to show my wife the country. I do think it's very expensive. I hate the bureaucracy, a lot of it. And most of my anger at the time was starting a new business starter with the government just pillaging me for tax. And I was like, how do people get started in business? I mean, it was just, I was so angry at the time. In the end, I saw quite a successful business. I sold my apartment, but just knew I didn't want to do all that again. I needed a break from the UK, I think, to realise that now I live in Europe, regret even Brexit. I think it's so much nicer to go. And I was thinking, oh, isn't it nice to go from Poland to Holland, where I just go, it's just stress-free, and this is amazing. We could have had all this, and we just don't. And I was thinking, oh my God, it's the worst decision ever. Did I really know myself?
Don't get me started there, Shaun.
That goes for me being a runaway at the start. So I was really looking for something that made me happy. Really
interesting.
Yeah, really went away as a runaway.
There's a bit of an understanding of, like, you were a runaway from the UK, but became a believer in Ukraine. Wow, that's fascinating.
And it made me a better. I mean, it was more luck than judgment. But I just found a home here, and I maybe I was searching for a long period of time to find home. And I'd always been in the army since 16, so I travelled all around the world. And from I was born and lived in Bournemouth, probably North London, the longest I'd lived for 9 years. So I never really had a home. I was like a nomad, travelling around everywhere. I don't think England really felt home for me. So when I got here, you just know when you buy a house, then you go, this is the one.
Yeah,
this is the one. When I got here, I just saw. I love the people. I love the climate. I love that it cost £1.50 for a steak and 30p for a beer when I got here. I was single at the time, I got to be honest. So, it was like an amazing time in my life there in another country and single. So I enjoyed all the benefits.
I love it. It's like, do you know what home is for me? It's where I can get cheap steak and cheap beer. That's
absolutely. I'm a simple man. Yeah, I'm a simple man. Yeah. So, I mean, I didn't plan it. I'd never tell anybody I plan it, but I wasn't scared of opening doors or trying something new. And I always, but the one certain was I knew I could, as Andrew Mars said to me once, you have got transferable skills. It might be being a sniper and in the military, but you have got them.
Yeah.
So I did have transferable skills that I could use in the military in Ukraine, and that's all I really had. I wasn't academic. I didn't do for it at school, and the waste industry that I was a consultant in, well, Ukraine doesn't really have that sort of. They're not really up to that par yet with the European Union, but they will be. But it was a great. Mariupol was up and coming. It was a beautiful. Ukraine was up and coming. It's just a beautiful. They've got aspirations. They've got democracy here. Everyone's fighting for that. We've got a Jewish president, despite what the narratives throw this way. We've got an Islamic defense minister. We have some of the largest communities of Jewish communities in the world outside of America and Israel. So
in fact, this morning in my video, one of my news videos, I read out your tweet. I was talking about this to you before the video, and you had a right old rant about Marjorie Taylor Greene and her tweet that was anti-Semitic, or saying that, etc., and it was just really interesting. I was like, I'm going to be interviewing this guy in like an hour and a half, and I'm reading out his tweet going, bah. But yeah, it's really interesting. It's such a shame, like, Ukraine, as you say, has all these aspirations and desires to be the very best of what it can be. And
it's not perfect. Yeah, it's not perfect. No country is perfect. But being Putin's narrative that it's a Nazi state is just totally incorrect, especially when Parliament doesn't even have a far right representative in Parliament because it can't meet the thresholds to get into Parliament, and largely far right's been removed since 1991, since its independence. And to be honest, we have probably less far right here than most European countries.
Yeah.
So go figure. It's incredible. So this is direct Putin narrative, which is that anybody that isn't Russian is a Nazi. Which Timothy Snyder touches on. Read his paper, but I was saying that before he wrote that, explaining to the West what actually Nazi Russia means, and but using my terminology, my vocabulary, not his, is far better than mine. But I was saying the same thing,
Yeah, and I did. I remember doing a video on this actually very much at the beginning of when I started doing the Ukraine war stuff, which is exactly how the Russians use the term Nazi, and basically it's anything that's not them.
And to resonate, they want to resonate in Europe and get support. Yeah. So they use Nazi because they know that word, the impact of that word. So they were hoping to get support. And I talked to you earlier, I was never social media. I was a trigger puller. I was in the military. Now I got like 20,000 views. I'm not a military blogger. I'm not I could talk about the ground in Ukraine, the feeling in Ukraine. I could talk about my personal views, and that's got me, quite quickly 20,000 followers on Twitter just by tweeting about Miss Green, about her anti-Semitic tweets, and I think you touched on it. It was a Brit saying that my family is Ukrainian, and you can quite come over to my house if you want and tell my family that they were all Nazis.
Yeah, just be really powerful. If you, rather than saying a Ukrainian saying that, actually a Brit saying that, I think has a bit more purchase in the kind of like the narrative of like, come over to here, meet me and my family, and just tell me if I'm a Nazi. Like, I'm talking to you now as a British person, face to face with you, Marjorie Taylor Greene. Am I that? No, I'm not. So jog on. But we like there were two points I wanted to talk about before I let you go and enjoy the rest of your day. But one was going to do with compartmentalization, but I'll finish up with that because it's then moving on to kind of hope and helping people get over stuff and what you're doing now. But talking to what you were just saying, and we were talking about this before we went live, which is that you weren't big on social media, but now you are. And actually, it's important to use our voices for the good in this information war. Something I'm talking about all the time. My viewers will know I constantly talk about fighting in the information spaces. This is me helping in the war against Russia, whereas you were helping on the ground fighting in Ukraine. And in fact, that war needs to be won on the ground for us to win, for us to be able to have a regime change in Russia that leads to a winning in the information space, so we can have our democracies function without interference and all that kind of stuff, right? And you were saying that you have noticed that actually there has been some changes in the information space. Do you want to talk to that a little bit? Because I found that quite interesting.
Yeah, I get a lot of trolls. So I get a lot of mercenary this, mercenary that. And, I've quite new in 2 years, but I'm not dumb enough to know that, people like Graham Phillips have been pushing this agenda a year before the full-scale invasion, 2-3 years before the full-scale invasion. And they had the monopoly on social media, those guys, Patrick Lancaster, Graham Phillips, and all those, Hinkle. They've had all the
Jackson,
totally
Hinkle.
promoting, just totally promoting the Russian agenda. With nobody of that sort of able for equivalent, a Brit, say, in Ukraine, combating those narratives from Russia until we were exchanged. And you have Aiden has got 130,000 followers on Instagram and Twitter, and myself just mounting up, and we've written books and we do podcasts, documentaries. There's going to be a film hopefully soon, and we were able to. It just about 6 months after my exchange, I just thought there's nobody combating that, and I lived in Mariupol, and it's just not like how they're saying it is. So I started to in November of 2022, a couple of months after I really was released, just tweeting stuff with 30 followers. And then all of a sudden, a year and a half later, I'm sitting there with nearly 20,000 followers and a book and a documentary. And we are seeing a shift. It's not, the denazifying Ukraine is not the same resonance than it was in 2022, in February 2022. It's just not. And all the time before that. For one thing, I'm able to argue the fact about Azov. You know, even in 2018, they only had less than 2,000 active servicemen and women. Now, if you're going to base your country on ideals on less than 2,000 people in the Ukrainian military that might be extremists, and then my argument was, hold on, I worked there. 90% of those people were guys that couldn't get work in their own villages. It's one of the biggest employers in the area, working for National Guard at the military. So 90% of those guys weren't even Nazis. So that leaves you like 10% of 2,000 people that could be extreme, which you get in every country. Yet Russia has pumped out this narrative that Azov is Nazi, Ukraine is Nazi. Suddenly I just started typing Twitter and going, hold on a minute, that's not exactly the case. I worked with them for 2 years. It's not like that at all. And certainly when I went there in 2018, it said to me that I want to move away from that stigma. The only reason I left the Marines was because the Azov and National Guard was because the Marines was the only place you go to get a contract to get my citizenship and residency. You need to be a citizen to work in National Guard. Instructor's okay, but I wasn't going anywhere with my visa and my residency, so I changed. But now I'm able to talk about those myths and narratives that the likes of Graham Phillips and the likes of Patrick Lanker, who have no idea of just promoting a Russian agenda, are now able to go, actually, these are the pictures. These are the video snippets. This is me with them. I'm able to put them all online and say, you're talking rubbish. Now what we're seeing is a lot of bloggers and Western bloggers over there. Their world's got a little bit smaller. They're fighting for the same information space now. Some of them have just gone missing, like Russell Bentley this week. Some have been killed.
I haven't reported on it, yeah.
Amount of bloggers that are suddenly disappearing and committing suicide. Does not anybody find that uncanny? Mr. Phillips must be sweating buckets right now. So what we're doing is filling that information space now with positive and responsive, good quality information about Ukraine. Sometimes we get it wrong, and I don't mind holding my hands up. And I think a lot of my followers are really like it because I talk from the ground and I live in Dnipro, and I talk about the things that matter on the ground. But we are seeing a shift in the Westerners in the propaganda space, not so much America, but definitely within Europe, and we're now working on America. So, we're trying to tell them, actually, it's not how it's perceived by MAGA, and Ukraine aren't Nazis. We live here, we're trying to fight for a democracy, and there are many people like me doing exactly the same thing.
Incredible. Well, okay, so that's that. So now that's, if you don't mind, like the experience you had, the psychological trauma that has involved is obviously very difficult, I assume, to rehabilitate from. How is your rehabilitation going? Do you find that talking about it helps, or do you find that compartmentalization helps, and therefore what we've just done has now opened up a can of worms? Or like, how is your journey going there? And then do you use that? I know you've touched on this already. Do you use that to help other people?
Let me take these off. Yeah, the dark, it's just got a bit darker now, and I'm in a room full of open windows and glass, so I've had to shut the curtains, otherwise it's too bright. So yeah, I do a bit of both, actually. Like I said to you, one thing is I've got life experiences. I sort of, didn't go into this blind. I had a real understanding of what I was going into. I'd learned to fight Russians for 9 years. I knew, if I was going to be captured, these sorts of things can happen, and had training in it. So I'm very good at I can't even say it now.
Compartmentalizing.
Yeah, I'm sticking them in my folders and then just leaving them in the cabinet. So. And to me, I don't know. I've always had a fascination with survival anyway, and always loved those films and stories and of people against the odds. And for me, I think I come out thinking I've just had mine. I won't kid you. I think, and I've just gone through that, done all that. I had no idea what was going on while I was being captured, or whether I was going to make it out alive. But I certainly wanted to know what happened between when I was captured and when I was exchanged, because I just had a news void. So I spent weeks listening to podcasts, trying to understand what had happened and who had got out, who was dead, who was alive, and I'm still finding out 2 years later.
Yeah.
So for me, it was about information, about filling those gaps that had been in for nearly a year fighting. And then it was dealing with my wife's story. My wife had a story, so I was, wanted to listen to that and what they were doing. And
Good point.
then my mum was telling me she was going to the Port Cutler's house and talking to the Foreign Office, and the Bishop of Bedford came round. She was telling me all these stories, and Richard Fuller, my local MP, and who she'd met. So I was dealing with those stories, listening to them. And then I thought, well, I'd always written, so I thought I'd write it all down. And it was only my former colonel, Richard Kemp, who's in the media, does a lot of reporting in Israel at the moment, who sort of said, have you ever thought about writing a book? And I was dead against it. So I was absolutely, I thought it was too soon, and my friends are still captive. But I went down to Penguin, who were really interested in it, and listened to what they had to say. And I'm so glad I did listen to it, because it was able to put down my story, and that was really therapeutic. They made it very easy for me to tell my story, working with Matt Allen, who helped me put the book together. Because, like I said, it's you don't drive a car without lessons, and I'd never put together. I had all this writing and all these stories. I wasn't sure how to format it and put it all into book, because I could write another 3 books. That's like of what some of the and it might sound funny, but the gallows humour has a lot to do with it as well. And we had great gallows humour in captivity. I don't know how I would have done on my own, but for me, I've gone through that, and but who knows in the future? The council was always saying that you don't know what's going to happen in the future. At the moment, it's still a war. There's some barriers I'm still putting up because we have to deal with this every day. Maybe I'm just getting ready for the next friend or the next, something worse to happen. But we deal with this every day. So maybe in the future, when it all goes quiet and I'm not thinking about the war, and podcasts and social media are going to come straight off social media when this war finishes, for starters, and then lock myself away and give myself to my wife again, and hopefully retire in a happy and free Ukraine. But until then, I don't really know how it's going to affect me mentally. I certainly don't have flashbacks. I sleep like a baby. I don't drink very much. I certainly can't afford drugs. So it's like I don't know. It's one of those things you have to watch, and just, again, you still have to identify. It's not something normal. It's not something normal we did. I'm very lucky to be alive, and I tell everybody that it's you can have the best plans, but once the first bullets go down, all those plans go to shit, to be honest. And you're really going on character, will training, and all those other things.
I wonder how much, and I do not want to belittle your strength. In fact, I'm talking to your strength, but I wonder. I don't know. This is the philosopher in me talking, because my first book was whether we have free will or not, right? And so it's the idea that sometimes we win the natural lottery. By that I mean we just dealt some cards that mean that we're in a better position to deal with things. And I wonder, do you ever think I'm just really lucky to have been dealt the cards that I have this psychology or physiology or whatever that means I don't get flashbacks, and I'm just lucky that I appear to be able to cope with this, where there might be some other person out there who's had the same experience as me, comes out the other end and just falls apart and isn't able to cope, or is this the hard work that you put in to fix yourself? I don't know.
I don't know, to be honest. I talk about it from my specific perspective, but for me, I talked about it earlier. I never got to that bar where I was at before, which was horrendous. I didn't know where I was going then. Didn't know what I wanted to do. Where do you put your energy when you've been 9 years with someone? And I made so many mistakes after that, then started drinking a bit more and not really, just losing focus on discipline. And so I was really unsure about that time. And that for me holds more bad memories than anything.
Interesting. Yes. So like, you've been electrocuted, you've been beaten, but I'll tell you what, after, wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, that holds more misery for me than anything, and I never want to go back to that place.
And Ukraine, the Ukraine has been your rehabilitation. I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, I think I was a bit nervous coming back, and I thought, do I really want to do this again? But it my home. And once I crossed the border back in for the first time, and I knew we were okay to do that, then I did little things along the way. I was so lucky that I had other people, the books about other people picking me up and their actions. So Bear, my commander, was amazing, and his decision to go and wanted to get back to his wife. My last call to my wife, my best friend Dima, and what happened to him, and we picked each other up all the way through, even through captivity. You know, Brahim was an amazing guy to be in captive with, because he had the humor and was 100% certain we were going home. And you know, even I was like, oh, I don't know, mate. He was a brilliant guy to be captured with. So, you know, I'd had a lot of people, and I drew my inspiration on a lot of other people who picked me up. And even now, you know, the fight in Ukraine, I'm still in awe of Ukrainians who have to live with the everyday norm and what they consider to be norm, which no country in the world should ever have to live under. They should have all the support in the world. And these people just get up every morning, go and make coffee shop that's just been bombed, clear it all up, get it rebuilt, still carry on with life, even though their uncles in captivity, or, you know, their brothers died, and people just get on with it here because they have to, because Russia can withdraw, they can retreat, they can go back into Russia and nothing's going. We don't have that luxury here. We're fighting for democracy, we're fighting for our freedom, and we're fighting for our way of life here. Everything Russia hates.
Are you hopeful for Ukraine?
Yeah, I'd still the will to fight is not gone. I don't see it. I mean, we're tired and things are, you know, it's creaking. I'm more concerned about we don't have enough artillery shells, and we don't have enough air defense. And, you know, I hear a lot of people on the ground, you know, if you wouldn't have a problem with, I don't think you'll have a problem with mobilization if they were confident that America would support and Europe would support them with weapons.
Right.
We're in the F-16 still.
Mm.
So, you know, what's the point in bringing 500,000 people, another 300,000 mobilization people who don't have the tools to do the job?
That's a dimension that I've not so clearly thought about or recognized before, mate. And I think that's really interesting, because I talk about the impact on the economy, the impact on, like, people running away across the border to escape mobilization, but actually there is no point in mobilizing if there isn't the support, you know, for the training and the equipment to actually make these people, like, warrant being mobilized. I mean,
that's the basic needs of a soldier is pay. He wants to know he's got the weapons to be able to do the job and defend his country.
Yeah.
If you take any of those sorts of things away, then you're going to end up with a demoralized front line and a demoralized mobilization. And then a dry rut sets in. What you want is confident people, are confident in the ability of their government, and the confident ability that the West is going to support them. Unfortunately, who can tell me that they're confident that the West is going to support Ukraine?
Yeah.
You're already going to get cracks in it. And that's what I see on a day-to-day basis here. You get a lot of bad news, because on the front lines it's miserable for both sides, to be fair, and war is miserable. So you have to filter out the bad news from the front line, from actual news that's, you know, generally a problem. And one of them, we don't get enough equipment, enough rockets, enough air defense, got no shells. It's only just been recently put into the media. We've known about this 3 months. The horror stories on the front lines of shell conservation is now shell hunger. You know, it's very. You get the news in the West gets there maybe 2 months later than than it does on the ground in Ukraine.
And that's why I do what I do, to try and change that. It was really nice. Someone contacted me yesterday to say, I really appreciate what you're doing. I hear about stuff from you literally months before I do from, like, media sources, and that's because I don't know that, like, we just are, we have our own sources, and it's all I do is Ukraine. And so you end up having pretty good idea of what's going on. But for some reason, mainstream media doesn't always, they've got too many other things to concentrate on in the world. And so it's not an accurate portrayal.
Sorry, I didn't mean to. The other thing with mainstream media is that it's so easy to report on Ukraine. So generally the bad news comes from Ukraine all the time. My prime one is like 20,000 Ukrainians try to avoid the draft. You're going to get people trying to avoid the draft. What about the 1.5 million, 1 million, over 1 million Russians who avoided the draft and are now sitting in Cyprus, Thailand? Why aren't we reporting on that? Why are we reporting on the negative? Why do no Western media ever report on Ukrainian successes the same way as they report on their failures.
Yes, 100%. You get complete agreement with me. Yeah, that's something I rail about all the time. Well, look, Shaun, I'm going to do some thanks to people who support the channel, if you don't mind. Louise Foley, thanks. She said this right at the beginning, and then left almost before Shaun came on. So she'll catch up tomorrow. Thanks, Louise. It's really kind of you. Kevin Forst, who's asked some great questions, has given some ATP Geopolitics memberships. Thanks, Kevin. And Richard Bennett, always doing that. So thanks very much, mate, as well as Salt of the Earth. Really appreciate those memberships being given out. Thanks for your questions, Kevin, by the way. And then Mark Biscu says this, who's a Ukrainian in Canada, who's always such a great supporter. And in fact, I'm wearing this Vivisanka top that he very kindly, him and his wife Olena, sent me, that I received in the mail today. So that's why I'm wearing this. I'm super excited about this. We can't seem to put together the right series of words to show our admiration and appreciation to this hero. So that's obviously talking about Shaun. We will purchase Shaun's book as soon as this stream ends. P.S. Jonathan, Olena says, you look quite handsome in your Vivashanka. I agree. Sorry, Vishirvanka. I must get the word right.
Yeah.
I'll practice that. Thank you very much, Mark and Olena, and thanks for the really, really kind words. And thanks for pointing out indeed that Shaun is quite literally a hero for doing what he's done and being through what he has been through. Brian Ivy with a super sticker. Thanks, Brian. Always a great supporter. And then finally, thank you very much for Rod Schools, who's now a member. Okay. I really appreciate that. And thanks, Mark and Olena, for everything you do for this channel. Thank you, Shaun, for sharing with us. There's at least another 5 hours of information I would like to talk with you about, and your thoughts and opinions. But alas, we must get on with the day. What are your sort of final words? What is there anything you haven't talked about that you would like to mention?
Well, we talked about hope recently. You can't really, hope's an undervalued feeling. Yeah, we can't lose hope as a country to people. You lose hope, you lost everything. So we got to hope that the Americans would get this package through, aid package through, not just for us but for Israel now, and can become a bigger part in Ukraine's democracy and fight for freedom. So there's that. But I still try and raise awareness to the prisoners that are my friends that still captured 2 years on. We still try and talk about that and keep them in the public eye, especially with things like the Crocus massacre now that's just highlighted, or the torture that's going on just with those guys. You can imagine I had some horror stories, so I won't go too much into detail, but I was very lucky on that front. But really, that's about it, really. We just talk on Twitter about my from a ground level perspective, living in Ukraine still with my wife, and for as long as we can until we get liberation, really.
Please, everyone, go and follow Shaun on Twitter. Old Dog 100 UA is his handle. So please go and find Shaun Pinner on Twitter. Follow him. Add to that 20,000, or however many he said, 18.7 thousand. Make that even bigger and more meaningful, and that'd be great. It's just on that Crocus City Hall thing. Isn't it odd when they can cut someone's ear off basically on social media and post that on social media as if to say this is all right, like that's fine, and then parade him with no ear and then him saying, oh yeah, Ukraine, it's what did it, and you're like, is this where we're at now? Is this a normalized?
I've been very lucky, because when I wrote the book, I really didn't know how it's going to be perceived, and really it's just another war book, and that some people could really read. So I was very lucky when something like 20 Days in Mariupol came out, which everyone should watch, because that just put testimony to my book in a visual capacity, which was horrendous. 25,000 people. Over, they reckon it's going to be somewhere around 70 they're talking about. But really over 25,000 Russian-speaking Ukrainians were slaughtered, including women and children. So, something like that. And then, 20 Days in Mariupol, followed by something like the Crocus massacre, allows me to go, look, that piecing together all that evidence, that happened me. That's what they're doing. That's what they're doing to Ukrainians. That's what they're doing to my friends. Now they just don't care. They're putting it on social media. Whether they're guilty or not, I don't know. But you tell me if cutting someone's ear off is the right thing to do, and electrocute. And you saw when they were captured and when they went into court, one of them they wheeled in a wheelchair. He was unconscious.
Like, face beating up and and you're just thinking,
guilty.
Yeah. What
it's
is
just
going
crazy.
on?
And it's all trial by public opinion. So there isn't a justice system in Russia. It's if you don't fit the Kremlin's bill, you're going to find it hard. You're going to do some hard labor. Look at Navalny. So, I wasn't a big fan of Navalny, but certainly not a big fan of someone who jails someone because they're the opposition, even if I don't agree with a lot of their views. You don't stick them in that and then kill them in prison.
Yeah.
And like he's doing with many of them. So, Russia hasn't got a justice system. It doesn't have a functioning government as such. It's a gangster state. And that's, I'm going to end it there because that's basically what I talk about now.
Yeah. It doesn't have a moral leg to stand on. Well, look, thankfully, you have two legs to stand on, even if one of them was somewhat stabbed by those torturers. And just, the perfect answer to those Russian trolls who want to denigrate Ukraine and say how wonderful Russia is. Well, you've got someone here who has experienced the sharp end of the spear, as you used it in a different context, but the sharp end of the spear in terms of the Russian moral framework in terms of torture, imprisonment and torture, and what they do to people against the international laws. And you are a wonderful advocate for Ukraine and for being on the right side of morality and the right side of history. So thank you, Shaun.
Can I just say one thing before we go? I've just had this week, Friday, success in getting a resolution in Ukraine about the treatment I had by Russia. So we've just literally won a law case which will allow, hopefully, other prisoners and other people that have been treated inhumanely and really succumb to the Russian atrocities and the genocide they're currently committing in Ukraine. We were successful in getting a verdict that I was treated inhumanely, which will now hopefully we will look to give them time to settle, which I don't think they will. I think they'll largely ignore it like they've done before. But we would then look to enforce that verdict through the European courts, European Court of Human Rights, or the UK. We're not entirely sure myself. Yeah, I'm not a legal, but we will look to do that, which would then hopefully allow victims of war and Russian aggression to then claim against the Russian state, make them culpable. So hopefully we'll set precedent, and then in the European courts, and then hopefully our aim is to get Russia to pay for their
reparations,
crimes that they're committing. Yeah, absolutely. It can't replace people or people they've killed, but it might help someone rebuild a home. And this is the way we're going with it. We really want to sort of use that and push that 300 billion we've got seized in Russian assets and start using some of that.
That is absolutely right. Thanks. That it's this great guest, needs primetime exposure, and salute to Shaun Pinner. I mean, he has had some good primetime exposure, but like the more that this happens, the better, because what he has to say needs to get out there continually and remind people, because we do unfortunately forget so much, too much. Anyway, thanks so much, mate. Really appreciate that. And if you ever want to have a chat again, if there's anything else you feel you haven't talked about, my channel's always open to you. So thank you, my good man.
Thank you, Jonathan. Nice. Thanks for having me on. It's a real pleasure.
Yeah. Okay, buddy. Well, look, stay on the line. I'll end the stream. In the meantime, thank you everyone in the live chat who's had a lively live chat at the side. I really appreciate all your continued support. Let's really struggle. Let's not struggle. Let's succeed. But let's continue to be on that right side of morality and on that right side of history. Thank you so much. Take care, and I'll speak to you all soon.